Waheguru Ji Ki Fateh. Waheguru Ji Khalsa, Waheguru Ji Ki Fateh. Welcome to another session of Khoj Gurbani. Ravinder Singh here from Columbus. Um, Today, it's my turn to sort of walk us through a Shabad, which appears on page 526 of the Guru Granth Sahib in Rag Gujari and authored by Paiter Lochan. I guess you can all see it on the screen. Before we plunge into the Shabad, I think that this is one of those Shabads that attracts a great deal of attention over and again. And I think part of the reason that it does so is that it appears, it suggests reincarnation / transmigration. So before we get into the Shabad again, the idea of reincarnation, the idea that when we die, we are held accountable for our deeds on earth in some divine court. And through a complex accounting system, a balance sheet is prepared and audited. And then it depends on where you fall on the plus or the minus side, and you return for another round on earth. And what form we return to, only the Creator knows. But apparently, there is a list of 8.4 million species to choose from. And this cycle then continues from one birth to another until we find liberation, quote unquote, mukti, from this recycling. When and how that happens, though, is somewhat obscure to me. But the fact is that this freedom, this liberation remains the goal of human life, at least in the Indian systems, where this concept is a very powerful and a very sophisticated model. It weaves everything, all creation, into one big giant weave. And it also presents, when you hear how it's sort of presented, a very calibrated idea of justice. So, bottom line, reincarnation, transmigration exerts a tremendous influence on Indians. And that includes us who are from India, the Sikhs, because Sikhi and the Sikh gurus and us, we have all lived in that environment, and whether we know it or not, I mean, you can't go very far in India without encountering this notion. So let's look at the Shabad, and then what I'll do is lay out its literal meaning, my English rendition of it, and then we'll jump to my thoughts on this, which are not very cohesive. They're pretty disjointed, so bear with me, but I will just share with you what I think about this. So let's look at the Shabad first. And it goes as follows. Gujri, Antkal jo lashami simre, aisi chinta mehje mare, sarv jon val val avtare, Hari bai Gobind naam mat visare, rahau, Antkal jo istri simre, aisi chinta mehje mare, बेसवा जोन वल वल अवतरै अंतकाल जो लड़के सिमरै ऐसी चिंता महजे मरै सूकर जोन वल वल अवतरै अंतकाल जो मंदर सिमरै ऐसी चिंता महजे मरै प्रेत जोन वल वल अवतरै अंतकाल नारायण सिमरै ऐसी चिंता महजे मरै बदत ते लोचन ते नरमुक्ता Pitambar Vake Hriday Base. That's the Shabad from the. Here's how I sort of read it in English, and I'll share that with you. Anyone who dies with thoughts of lashami, that is wealth, in the final moment, will reincarnate as a serpent. I implore you, my mother, here, mother is not literally the physical mother, but not to forget Gobind, the Lord of the earth. This is the refrain. So this is the central idea, is that if you die with thoughts other than that of Gobind, you are liable to reincarnation. And then he goes on to say, anyone who dies with thoughts of women in the final moment, which I thought was interesting because it doesn't address women. I mean, how about them dying with thoughts of men on their minds? But that's another matter. So we'll reincarnate as a prostitute. Anyone who dies with thoughts of children in the final moment will reincarnate as a pig. Anyone who dies with thoughts of mansions in the final moment will reincarnate as a ghost or a goblin. And anyone who dies with thoughts of God, um, again, God, whatever that means, in the final moment will escape this cycle of reincarnation. That's kind of my take. And I tried to render it in some ready made English here. Now, when I looked at this Shabad, right, here's what I did. Uh, the thought occurred to me that what if I take this literally to mean what it's saying? That obviously raises the issue of reincarnation. And then what if I kind of try and move away from the literal and see if there is a more nuanced understanding to the Shabad? So, what became very evident to me was that even if you took it literally, there were some logical inconsistencies to which I will come in a moment. But what I did was I picked some of the key words from this Shabad and I tried to track them in Gurbani. We have the technology, so it's easy to do a search. So I took some of these words and did a search just to understand how they appeared, in what sort of context did they appear. And the words that I picked uh, were Antakal, obviously, Ant, Simre, Autre, Lachmi, Istri, Beswa, Joni. I kind of went through all of this, and I won't, I have a list here, but I'm not going to read it here. But so with each one of these words, I kind of tried to figure out what could the meaning really be other than the literal meaning. And it's interesting because when you look at Antakal, I got the sense from looking at the meanings of Ant and the associated lines with it. Uh, Ant and Antkal seem to always go with a warning, that beware. Antkal kich saath na chale, Antkal mat lage peed, Antkal pachatasi, regrets. So there's always this association with regrets on Antkal. So that's one thing I noticed. And then when I looked at Lashami, which, by the way, I noticed only appears about twice or thrice. And in fact, it is a word that is primarily used by the Bhagats. I mean, the Gurus, I don't think have used this word, at least not in my search, which I found interesting because it says something about the environment and where they lived. I mean, the Lochan, is from Maharashtra. So when I looked at Lakshmi, Ladke, Mandir, I began to see a pattern, and that was that all of these words were signifiers of Maya. So Tilochan could be saying, hey, if your mind is preoccupied with Maya, you are missing an opportunity. Because I felt that Antakal could also mean an opportunity, because after all, time is not always just chronological. It is also opportunistic, as in timing. Time and timing. It's the Greek notion of kairos, not chronos. They have this idea of chronos and kairos. And chronos, of course, being chronological time, and kairos being timing, opportunity. So I began to see Antkal as being a matter of chronos, as an opportunity. And the warnings that go with it were basically to say, hey, this is an opportunity. Make sure that your timing is right. That's kind of how I began to understand this Shabad. Then I looked at otre, which to me was an interesting word because when I was a kid, I remember mothers sometimes scolding their kids. Perhaps my mother did too, but I don't remember it, with the word otrea. And I discovered that the meaning of otre is to take form. So obviously, even in the Shabad, it's saying, Autre, you're taking this form. Again, Autre appears, I believe, no more than 2 or 3 times. And it's interesting that it's used by the Bhagats again. The gurus have not used this word. Kabir ji has used it in a couple of places where he's very clear. Kabir har ka simran chad ke hoi rakhe nar gadhi hoye ke utere. A donkey. Par sahe man char. Now, obviously, Kabir is very metaphorical and very symbolic, so we needn't take him literally, but we'll come to that later. So I began to sort of absorb some of the meanings as they appear in different contexts, and I began to think, maybe this is he's talking about timing. Maybe he's talking about grabbing the opportunity that is available to you. Maybe he's talking about human life being an opportunity. Those are the kinds of thoughts that were revolving around. Then, on the other hand, as I said earlier, if you were to take this literally, there are still some inconsistencies and you run into problems. Because one of the inconsistency is that not all of these expressions here refer to life forms. A serpent, a pig, maybe a life form, but a prostitute, I don't think is a life form, and a goblin, one doesn't know, right? So there's that logical inconsistency already. And then again, if we were to take this literally, then I think the model of justice that karma and reincarnation wishes to present to us isn't all that attractive, because what the Shabad then reads is, hey, I mean, you know what? You can live your life any way you like. And then at the last moment, if you start thinking about quote unquote God, you're delivered. Things are cool. So live like a rake, do whatever, and then just at the last moment. Except the problem is, I don't know how many people are aware of their last moment. So there are some inconsistencies, some logical difficulties, even if you were to look at this literally. So that's where I kind of was left with when I went through these words. And I said, where might this all lead me to? So, with that said, I want to now jump to um, how I personally see it. Don't ask me for how I arrived at this, because it's not a conclusion that I'm trying to present to you, but I'm just simply sharing some thoughts. And certainly not offering you any final answers. I do believe that in the realm of the spirit, the desire for certitude actually is a sign of immaturity. I mean, there are no certitudes here. So my first thought was that I don't think that one has to always take a for or against position. We know that whenever we discuss the Shabad, we wind up talking about reincarnation, and we have a lot of for and a lot of against. So it inevitably leads to that discussion. And I said to myself, does it have to be always a for and an against position? Could it be that the truth, or rather the explanation, might be somewhere in the middle? That was one thought, right? The second was that, I've said this before, Bani is, after all, poetry and very metaphorical. So clearly, not everything that Bani says should be taken quite so literally. So likewise, this Shabad shouldn't probably be taken that literally. Uh, but as I said, if you were to take the meanings literally, you have to think about the context and the times in which Bhagat Lochan lived and the gurus lived. As I said, this is a very powerful idea in the Indian, thought system. It's been around for thousands of years. So when Bhagat Lochan and the gurus lived, clearly, in order to get a point across, you couldn't just simply debunk this idea, right? So perhaps they used the idea to be more effective in their teaching, because effective teaching does require the cultural context. So that's one way to look at this, to say that, hey, this may be what it was meant then, but now we are talking hundreds and hundreds of years later. And my thought also was that if you do take these lines literally, uh, it it serves as a warning. And the warning has a similar purpose to even if you didn't take these literally. And so, for an Indian population to which this is addressed, and a culture that is so steeped, it is easier to goad people into desirable behavior through fear. So, perhaps this was some effective way of moving people to changing their behaviors and lifestyles. Um, through fear, saying, hey, if you don't get your act together, it's very likely you'll end up like a swine or a dog or whatever. That could perhaps be one explanation. On the other hand, if you don't take this literally, as some of us translated, if we see these as mental traits, as obsessions and fixations, I do believe it probably is addressing our mental obsessions and fixations, thoughts that we've had over a lifetime and what we've become. So even if you take that view, it still would require us to correct our behavior. So the net effect is the same. The idea is to change behavior, to move away from thought, to live a different orientation that Gurbani gives us, right? Those are the two orientations, thought and live, one, the rat race outward, the other being centered with your inner consciousness. Then I'm no scientist, but I was thinking about this, reincarnation and so on. And I said, well, I've always been told that the amount of energy in the universe changes form but remains constant. In other words, you can't create or destroy energy. I've heard that for as long as I can remember. Now, that would suggest to me that we, as bundles of energy, have obviously been around in some form, and we probably have been around for a long time. As a matter of fact, not long ago, I was watching a Nobel laureate who had died. I forget his name. It was in chemistry, and he did work on DNA. And so they were running a little program on him. And he had a couple of students sitting with him, and he said to them, don't think that you're 20 years old or 22 years old or 50 years old. You're actually very, very old. You're thousands of years old. He was obviously referring to the DNA. So I think that if energy is constant and it changes form, then it's very likely that we change some form as well when we die. Clearly, our body dissolves and finds its constituent parts. One also observes in the world that the universe has the characteristics of what we call a system, right? Which has inputs, outputs, and feedback mechanisms. So I think that we can kind of just through sheer observation see that we are parts of a very large ecosystem that has a lot of feedback loops and a lot of recycling going on. So if you take that view, then it's not very outlandish to think that all life forms become part of a larger biological life cycle. And if we accept that, then does it really matter what form we end up in, whether we are above the ground or below the ground or crawling? I mean, we are taking care of life, right? We are supporting life in some shape. And in the end, I would just sort of, as a reminder, I think what matters really is not to get bogged down in these end of life issues, but to heed Guru Amar Das's reminder to us, right? "E sarira mereya is jag mein aaye ke kya tud karam kamaya." In other words, that's the real question. What have you been up to in this life? And I think if we take care of this life, the rest will just take care of it. These were some of my thoughts on this Shabad Ji. Waheguru Ji ka Khalsa, Waheguru Ji ki Fateh.
Hanji, thank you, Virji. You want to do moderation?
You want me to moderate?
Sure.
All right. Okay, I'll do what I always do. Go to Dilpreet Singh first because he's first on my screen. Hanji Dilpreet. Can't hear you.
His mic may not be working.
Okay, we'll come back to you. Hey, Concur Ji.
Waheguru Ji ka Khalsa, Waheguru Ji ki Fateh. I kind of want to listen to other people before I share any thoughts tonight.
Okay, fair enough. Ranaveer ji?
Anji, can you hear me?
Hanji, Hanji.
Oh, Vaheguru Ji Khalsa, Vaheguru Ji Fateh Ji.
Ji.
Oh, one thing I'm glad that we have come back to the Shabad again because we did it once before. And after listening to that participation and ideas, perspectives, I thought we have to go back and look at that again. And thanks to you for your perspective on this one. When I started reading it, I think we should remain focused on this Shabad and look at what it says. Yes, we can go around and look at the references to get ideas. I remember when I was going to school, my teacher used to say these statements. Let's see that, and that applies over here. He would say, "Jekar Paramjit." You in the summer holidays, you're going to work hard. Then you come back, you're going to get grade A. In the sport, we tell students, if you do these things, you're going to win or you're going to succeed in life. Even now we say, if you do this thing, you're going to have this results. Our thinking has been so conditioned by the interpretation of this Shabbat in terms of reincarnation that we have not made any attempt to think outside the box. We always come back and start thinking the same terms by default. When I read this one, Antakal jo Lashami simarai, the way I thought about is, if you think about wealth, Antkal is not point in time, it is period in time. That means this is a period in time where the transformation takes place either from you go for spiritual elevation to spiritual deprivation, or you go for spiritual deprivation to spiritual elevation. The way I thought about is, and I want to focus here rather than going and talking about reincarnation, how many species are out there, we are going to merge into something. Let's focus on this one. If anybody, is thinking about wealth and monetary things, and because remember that it is not the spiritual depth which dictates that we are going to start thinking about money. It is a thinking about money is going to create the spiritual depth. So Jo Lakshmi is the first thing we have to think about, that if you focus on monetary things and wealth, these things, your spiritual depth is going to be such that you will be just like a snake who is always going around here and there. No stability in your consciousness, no stability in your life. And if you carry on with the same way of translating each line, the whole interpretation, Jo is Antakal, Jo Istri Simre. If you have focused on lust, you're going to end up in the spiritual deprivation. You're going to lead a life of spiritual deprivation. And what is that life? Like is just going to be a person who is so unstable with the sexual needs. Beshwa Joan Walal Utre. Same thing next, you go to the next line is Antakal jo ladke simre. Again, if you're thinking about all the time you're attached to your family, attached to your children, and if that is a thing, again, you're going to have spiritual deprivation. And what life you're going to lead? You're not dead. You're still living a life of spiritual deprivation, just like they are comparing, given metaphorically, like a pig. So I think this is the way I look at this. But what has happened that our thinking has been so entrenched with the meanings we have heard over and over and over again that we have not made an attempt to go outside. Then we try to justify the meaning. The reincarnation is not there. He's not talking about the reincarnation. He's just talking about the state which you are going to achieve once you start focusing on that. So I'm translating J. Lakshmi Simre is the first thought. And the implication of that is you're going to spiritual deprivation, and what state of life you're going to lead at that time is like a snake, like a prostitute, like a pig, and so on. So that's my understanding in very nutshell. But I'm glad that you came back to the show, because I always thought that we are on the wrong path in doing the interpretation of this one. So this is my take on that one.
Haji, thank you, Ranaveji. I hope that I emphasize the fact that we could go back into time, and when Bhagat Lochan lived, I'm very sure that people at that time were not thinking the way we are today. So we obviously are bringing our understanding, which is equally valid. What I'm suggesting is that it could possibly be because, as you said, this idea is so ingrained and entrenched, even today. So you can imagine how entrenched it might have been 300, 400, 500 years ago, right? So this may have been a way to goad people into really doing the right thing, whatever the right thing might be. But your point is well taken. I mean, I obviously suggested that we are talking about fixations, and this is what your life becomes. But thank you for the input. Anji, Ekunkar ji, are you Dilpreet? Are you available now?
Anji, can you hear me now?
Yeah, now we can hear you.
Oh, okay, good. Thanks. So I think thank you for taking time and explaining, and I loved the way you explained the logical inconsistencies, because I was also looking at the line of Rahao, which says Are bhai Gobind naam mat visre. So it is in the present tense, and it is telling something that we should not forget it or be in naam or hukam all the time. And then if we look at it from that perspective, the way you explained, that it is in the moment or the decision making time. And I also looked at this other shabad. You touched that line, ant kal mat lage peed rove raje kan padaye. So again, it is saying that something happened to their thought process or the reasoning behind their thought, or they accepted something and now they are crying because of that decision. So in that shabad, rove ram nikala paya, bali roye nae patar. So all those examples are there, which, and in that Guruji has also used antakal word. So I think it looks like to me in the moment or the decision making time, or we can say it is the thought behind the thought or the decision making thought. And as you said that we are what we think, thoughts make us. So Rahao line is telling us that we are makeup of our thoughts. So be think right things all the time, and otherwise it is saying that okay, if you are taking action under the influence of these type of thoughts, and this is what your state of being will be, or the results you might expect because of the thoughts. So again, the proverb which they say, right, that we are man of our thoughts, and then thoughts make us and we become what we think. I think this shabad is emphasizing that thing, that okay, may have right thoughts, and otherwise if you are thinking this way, that way, or thinking this and that, this is what you will become. So it is challenging us. Now it is up to us, do we want to become that, or we want to think the right way and be on the right path. I think, thank you, that's how I take it.
Thank you. And again, the epiphany for me in all of this was Antakal, which Ranavirji just said is period in time. That's why I kind of brought up the idea of chronos, meaning an opportunity. I think that is how Antakal needs to be read. I mean, after all, human life, which is dulam, is an opportunity. And if you stay fixated or get preoccupied with all of these things, then that's really what you're going to become.
Right. And one more
Haji.
thing, Virji, if I can say.
Sure.
See, the other thing is that today there is a big discussion in Sikhism on what is the form of the God, or what is the definition of God. I think same way we are getting stuck with this Antkal and these words which are being used in Gurbani to teach us something, and we are moving away from the teaching and getting stuck with this Brahmini or the concepts of that time, and we get stuck in that and we lose our message. Thank you.
Yeah, well, that's precisely why we have to be very careful on when we take words literally and when we don't, right?
Yeah.
Because one could argue that Gurbani is talking about spiritual death. It only very in passing talks about physical death. Yeah, physical death is just inevitable and it's going to happen. So I think a lot of Gurbani is really aimed at one's spiritual death and one's spiritual awakening. So yeah, definitely. Kulwant Kaur Bhen ji?
Can you hear me, Vijay?
Haan ji.
Okay, Hanji, Hanji. Thank you so much, Vijay. You explained it very well, and Dilpreet Vijay also. I think I also, we are doing it second time I read the Shabad, and I start with the Rahau Pankti, like Aribai Govind Naam Mat Visre. So as you explained, that this is a human life is an opportunity. So make sure that we are making the best of our time. And if we take it literally, literal meaning, and then I think it does not fit into the perfect model of justice that we talk about. And we shouldn't forget that this is poetry, and he used the imagery in order to get point across, to the people at that time. In simple words, this is, I think is this: we had to make sure that we are not wasting our time only Govind's Naam, Hari's Naam, Vaheguru's Naam can help us to, to live a life of rectitudes, and can help us, from not to be obsessed with all these images he has mentioned, like the mentions, the wealth, and the ladke, and all these attachments. Because, if we are obsessed with all these things, that will that's going to define our life. So we have to make sure that we are not, get lost in these things, and making sure that we are doing the best use of our time. In simple, that's what my thought.
And thank you ji. Ekungar ji?
Yeah, so excuse me. I don't have the familiarity with some of these shabads that all of you do, and so when I look at this shabad, the thing is, when I was in my 20s, I studied Tibetan Buddhism, and so I see a lot of resonance in the writings of the gurus with thought approaches that I also found there in the Buddhist tradition. And the two things that resonate, that seem, complementary, one is this word chinta, which I think is important because it gives the connotation of anxiety or apprehension or worrying. And I don't think it's something as simple as if you're thinking about money, or you're thinking about a woman, or it's about if you're like worried about it, if you're scared, if you're feeling anxious and apprehensive. And that goes back to I think the teachings from the Tibetan, I think it's the Tibetan Book of the Dead, where if your mind is disturbed at the moment of death, you are going to project into that disturbance in the process of transmigration. And I think the truth is, there isn't anyone who doesn't believe in reincarnation. It's just how much and what forms, like none of us would be spiritual if we really thought the awareness ended with the body, and the gurus clearly taught that it didn't. So the debate's more over, well, what does that transmigration look like, not whether it exists, and where do you go and for how long, so that's my that's one observation. And then the other observation is that the importance of meditation is because you never know when you're going to take your last breath. It's not like there's it's not like there's some big red carpet that gets rolled out and when you reach the end of it, you die. Any one of us could die in the next 30 seconds on any number of things. And so to me, this Shabad is a warning that, like, don't worry. Of course, you have to think about wealth and family and sexuality and all these things that we have to live, but don't worry about it. Don't let yourself get trapped and worry about these things, because any moment could be your last moment. And if you're focused on Gobind, if you're focused on that essence, that creator, then you're going to project your consciousness probably into a better path than if you're worrying about other things. So to me, that's what this Shabad is talking about, is don't worry about things as you live. You never know when your last moment's going to be, because there is an impact on the process, the death process, if you're in a state of anxiety when you die. Those are my thoughts.
Oh, thank you. And I'm glad you bring chinta up, because that was another word that I did some tracking on, and you're quite right. It doesn't just mean thinking, but it also has these other connotations. I like the word fixation better myself. I thought these are just fixations that we have, and we get stuck on our fixations. But thank you for the thought, and I'm rather disappointed that there won't be a red carpet rolled out. Anyhow. Gurjeet Singh Virji?
Maybe for you there will be. I'm not
Maybe.
sure.
I was expecting trumpets and carpets and a feast. I mean, heck.
Not for the rest of us, but maybe for you.
Okay.
Made in Kashmir.
Okay, thank you. Hanji Virji.
Hanji Virji. Waheguru Ji ka Khalsa, Waheguru
Your
Ji ki Fateh.
thoughts.
Hanji, let me correct the first word you read. It is not Gujri, it is Gujri. We don't read it right. Gujri. Gujri actually is when you say, you have to say with a stress. I could only was listening, but that's fine. Gujri is the wife of a Gujjar. Even Sahib Singh didn't pick up. When he is doing a Gujri Rag, he put that lady in front. Okay.
Okay, so what are your thoughts on the Shabad?
Yep. The very first line has clarified everything, but I think we didn't pick up the difference between Antakal and Mara. These are two very different things, and we are trying to mingle them with each other. Antakal is for spiritual death, and Mara is physical death. It has been very, very clearly indicated in Gurbani. That's why we are not able to find what is what. It says, Jo nar jamme na mara. This is physically. The one who is born will die, but may not die again. Na ave na jai. This second is about na ave na jai. So Antkal is a time which has been, I think, explained in Gurbani, a term, Tithe Kal na apade jithe Gurka Shabda Par. So Kal is nothing but our Param, which is to our soul. So we came here to get rid of this Param, because out of this Param we get a physical body again and again. So Bhagat Ji is saying that you have come here to remove this Param, but what you are doing is you are attaching yourself, as Rana Vidji said, to a non-spiritual stuff. Lashami outside is not going to help us to remove our doubts. Lashami will increase our doubts. So the Antkal, which is actually for the doubt, will not go. Kabir Ji has explained Kal in his first, when he starts with his Gauri Thitti, Parva Pritam Karo Vichar, Katme Khele Katapar, Kal Kalpana Kade Na Khai. It means that Param is constantly eating my wisdom. When you can save it, Ad Purkh mein rahe samai. When you just go back into the Shabad, that's the only time that you are not under the influence of Antkal. Otherwise, within this, there are chances that if we are not going back to your spiritual, what Satgur is, Saptavada Satgur, this process will continue. Then he refers to some of these, Beswa, I think picked up really nicely. But the word Sukar and others If you read it with the pause, Antakal je Lashmi simre aisi chinta mein je mara, then you give a pause because it's a full stop, then you give Beswa, and then you give another pause. Joni bal bal otre. Veswa is the present state of affairs. As Nome Pasha has very clearly said, Ek Bhagti Bhagwan, Jeh Prani ke Nahe Man, Jaise Sukar Swan. Presently, although he looks like a human being, but he's behaving more like a Sukar Swan. Nanak Mano Tahitan. But there's also a reference that Sukar Kukar Joni Prame Ton Lajna Ai, where he says that you have already incarnated through those lives. Don't you feel ashamed of that when Gurbani tells you, Ram Nam Chad Amrit Kahe Bikhai? That is another way of thinking that at present we are human beings, but the actions are more like our animals. But in future, we can't get rid of these incarnations. And then Narayan is the word which is confusing this Shabad because of all that story that there was a Bhagat, Ajay Mal, he put his son's name as Narayan. But in Gurbani, Narayan is our mool, not a son. Whenever it says Narayan word, it will come to our Satgur. So I think there is another clash over there, which they think it was his son. Pitambar word has to be described. It's a Puran Brahm. The one who has drunk the essence of Maya, that's within him, which also is Kabirji says, Tatta atar taryo na jai, tan tripa vanme reho samai. That's our state at this stage. But what is his state? Jo tripa vantan mahe samava. That the param is now inside and the taram is outside. But originally the param was outside and taram was not visible. So if we can revert this situation, I think the whole Shabad basically aims at that. Physically you will die. Within that time you have to Jivan Muktsuakhiye Mar Jive Marya. You have attained Mukti within the life. I think that's the whole theme of the Shabad ji. Vaheguru ji ka Khalsa. Vaheguru ji ki Fateh.
Thank you, Vijay. Thank you, everybody. I mean, I think we've had a good, broad discussion. And I really don't, I'm just going to go around and ask if anyone has any follow-up observations to make. I'll pause for a few seconds to see if someone wants to pipe up and say something. Okay, very good. I mean, considering that we've already touched on this Shabad once before, the reason we went back to this was because I think the last time we did not really focus on the Shabad itself, and some of these terms and so on needed some explanation. Hopefully, we have a little more clarity today. That said, I'm giving you back some time. Vaheguru Ji ka Khalsa, Vaheguru Ji ki Fateh.
Can I just, the Otre word, which you explained,
Anji.
there are two ways. In Punjabi, the Otre, if you look at, is like a childless, issueless, without offspring. But in Gurbani, Otre is more for the term, like as Kansi Naba has said, Utara, Upron het hon di kriya, Utarna, Janam lena, Sarir tarna. So these are this Gurmukhi, but I know we use that word. That's just a broken Punjabi, which we normally use for person.
Here it means to assume
similar.
form.
Yeah, they look hear very similar. You can. So this is Autarya Autarla Sopurk Sujan means he has come into the body.
Anji, thank you, Ji.
Okay.
Anybody before we switch off? All right. Thank you very much. Vaheguru Ji ka Khalsa, Vaheguru Ji ki Fateh.